Hello everyone, this is Jason for Primetime Aquatics, and today we're going to be doing a head-to-head comparison, sponge filter versus hang on the back. Let's see who wins, so stay tuned. Alright, so the first thing I think we should do is take a quick look at each type of filter and see how they work. So I have a hang on the back filter right here. It's a relatively small one. This would be used maybe to filter a 20-gallon fish tank. And so what's going to happen is the water is going to come right through here. This is the intake, and it's going to wind up going into the back of this hang on the back where there will be filter media. Maybe this is filter floss, carbon, bio balls, it could be sponge. So it's going to go through here and then eventually come right through the front. And so this is generally how a hang on the back filter works. If you're interested in these, I do have a video out, a money saving tip on how to save money on the cartridges. And so that's the hang on the back filter. And then we have the sponge filter. And so here we've got a relatively small sponge filter. This serves as surface area for bacteria to grow in. And so we have this piece, and I just wanted to show you the other pieces inside of the sponge filter. There's usually this plastic piece that just kind of slides right in there. And then you've got the base, and the base is weighted. It's kind of heavy. This is what's going to allow the sponge filter to sink, and that connects just like this. And so now we've got the sponge filter here. And then there is a top piece that we see right here. This is where the air hose is going to attach, just like that. And then we would have an air hose that goes in here. And then finally, we have an uplift tube. And so this would allow for more water to get sucked through the sponge. And so this is your basic sponge filter. No moving parts. You just need air to make it work. So those are the two main types of filters. Now, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each. All right, so thing number one, when it comes to sponge filters, they're generally going to be less expensive. So the actual sponge filter itself may be anywhere from $10 to $7, maybe $8, depending on where you get them. And then, of course, you're going to need an air pump to go with that. But that air pump may be able to power more than one sponge filter and therefore more than one fish tank. And air pumps, depending on the size, may go anywhere from $10, $15, $20 up to $30 or $40 or more. But that's the overall cost for a sponge filter. You need the air pump, you need the sponge filter. Now, when it comes to cost then, I would say overall the sponge filters are going to be cheaper because your hang on the back filters, again, depending on the brand and where you get them, the size, they can range anywhere from $20 up to $70 or so. And again, it's going to be dependent upon where you purchase them and the size of those things. The next thing you have to consider when it comes to overall cost is the power that you're using for the filters. Now, for us with a large fish room, one of the things that we have to be concerned about is how much power we're using to filter our tanks. And it would be literally impossible for us. We don't have enough power in our basement to run hang on the back filters in every single tank. And so what we've chosen to do is run one single air pump, and that filters all of our tanks, and it saves a lot of money. The other thing you have to consider is maintenance. And so when it comes to filtration, the sponge filter is relatively straightforward. You just take the sponge filter out of the tank, you squeeze all the stuff out of it, usually using tank water. You can just squeeze that sponge filter, get all the dirt out of that sponge filter, put it back in the tank. When it comes to hang on the back filters, you often have to replace the cartridges that come with the hang on the back filter, and every couple of months or so you're probably going to want to break that thing down and clean it out. So overall, long term, sponges may last 10 years. And so long term, the cost of a sponge filter is probably going to be less. Now, because there are so few parts when it comes to a sponge filter, as I've mentioned, they're going to be easier to maintain. They're also going to be easier to use. And so you don't have to worry about moving parts. You don't have to worry about anything breaking. It really is just a sponge and some air that's powering the whole thing. I think another major advantage to sponge filters is the fact that sometimes the power goes out. And when the power goes out, inevitably what can happen with hang on the back filters, and we've experienced this a few times ourselves, when we had a fewer number of tanks in the fish room, when we only had 5, 6, 7 tanks, we used hang on the back filters for all of those tanks. Periodically, if the power went out, at least one or two of those hang on the back filters would not restart after the power went out. And so the filtration in that tank would be off for up to 6, 7, 8 hours before we get home from work and realize the power must have gone out and now a couple of those hang on the back filters never restarted. You're not going to have that problem with a sponge filter. The pumps that are used to put the air through that sponge filter are going to restart as soon as the power goes on. The other benefit, because that sponge filter is submerged within the tank, the bacteria, the beneficial bacteria on the surfaces of those sponges will probably last longer than what you would find on a hang on the back filter. And so I think that is something to consider and an important advantage when we're talking about sponge filters. Another interesting advantage when it comes to sponge filters is if you're trying to breed fish and you've got small fry in the tank, sponge filters, generally speaking, aren't going to suck those fry in and kill them. In fact, fry sometimes will use the detritus and the microorganisms growing on that sponge filter as a source of food. Hang on the back filters are a concern. Now you can limit that concern by maybe putting an intake sponge on the hang on the back filter, but if you use them as you would typically buy them in a store, they have the potential to suck in fry and then you've lost those fish forever. Now I do think there are a couple of areas where the hang on the back and the sponge filters are pretty much neck and neck, all right? They're basically the same. There are three types of filtration. There's biological filtration, mechanical, and chemical. When it comes to biological filtration, the ability of a filter to run the nitrogen cycle in your tank going from ammonia to nitrite to nitrate, both filters do a great job. I have had sponge filters not much bigger than the one I have here in a 20-gallon tank with 100 bristlenose plecos, all the juveniles, and this did a great job of keeping ammonia and nitrites at zero. And so this little tiny filter did that without a problem. Not saying you're always going to have the same result, but for us, this worked out pretty well. In fact, I have never had an issue with a sponge filter not being able to keep up with the biological filtration in a tank. I've had 3 sponge filters in a 125-gallon tank with some Oscars, and there were no issues with biological filtration. I will say the same thing about hang on the back filters. I've never had an issue with ammonia or nitrites in a fish tank with the hang on the back filters. So I think both of them do a relatively good job of keeping our ammonia and our nitrites low in the tank, and therefore they're about the same when it comes to biological filtration. The other thing I would say is pretty much a wash is noise. So one of the things that's happening right now is we have our central system turned off to make the audio a little bit better. And so we've turned off the air pump. And when it comes to sponge filters, there's 2 sources of noise. One is going to be the pump, the air pump itself, that may make a little bit of noise. The second thing is the bubbling of the sponge filters in the fish tank. For hang on the back filters, some of them have been quite quiet. And in fact, it's not always price that determines how quiet your filter is going to be. I've had some filters that came free with tanks as part of kits, and they were some of the quietest filters I've ever had. I've had some rather expensive hang on the back filters that would make a fair amount of noise. So you just have to be careful, do your homework, do your research when it comes to hang on the back filters. Make sure that you're purchasing one that's going to be quiet enough for the environment that you're in. All right, so where do the hang on the back filters really shine? I think there's a couple areas. One, we've already talked about biological filtration, and the fact that it was relatively a wash between the 2 types of filters. However, the other 2 types of filtration, I think hands down, the hang on the back filter wins. One of them is mechanical filtration, the ability of a filter to pull solutes out of the water. And so that would help improve water clarity. One of the issues that we had in our Oscar tank, we did have 3 sponge filters in the 125, and it was doing a great job of biological filtration. However, the water was kind of cloudy. You'd start to see detritus and fish waste building up in certain parts of the tank because sponge filters aren't as well designed to pull that stuff into the filter to get it out of the water column off of your substrate. I do think hang on the back filters do a much better job of that. They create a little bit more flow. They do a better job of pulling stuff out of the water, improving water clarity. In fact, we put a hang on the back filter on that Oscar tank and things improved dramatically. There are, besides the Oscar tank, 2 other tanks where we still use hang on the back filters in conjunction with sponge filters. That's the 75 Mbuna tank and then our 150-gallon fish tank. And really, again, that is to keep the amount of detritus and fish waste and water clarity to keep that looking good. So the hang on the back filter, I think, definitely wins in mechanical filtration. The other area is chemical filtration, and that is the ability of a filter to pull out impurities in the water using some type of chemical reaction, the most common being carbon. So it's very easy to put in carbon in a hang on the back filter. I think a couple other advantages, however, are the hang on the back filter really tends to look a lot better. And I think that is one of the main reasons why people go in that direction over a sponge filter. For us, with all these fish tanks in the basement, we really can't afford, again, to have 40 hang on the back filters running on all these tanks. It just doesn't make sense from a money standpoint. But I will say, hang on the back filters, all you're seeing is that water intake tube, and so they're going to make the tank look a lot cleaner, a lot nicer, as opposed to having a big bulky sponge in the corner of your fish tank. The last thing, I think this is somewhat minor and it can be avoided, but based on the way we normally obtain sponge filters, if you buy them in a store, we've got this uplift tube here, and I have had a few instances where fish have gotten caught in here and they die. You could cover this and just run the air tube down and then cover the rest of this with some kind of a mesh. We tend not to do that. We've had thousands of fish down here in the fish room and to only have a few have an issue with getting stuck in here. It's not a real big deal, you know, as a percentage of the fish we keep, but be aware that it can happen. Some fish can get caught in here and you can have a problem. That is not typically going to be the case with a hang on the back filter because that intake is going to have some type of a guard on it to keep fish from getting into that. All right, so head to head, which one wins? You know, it really depends on your setup. If I had just a few tanks like we had years ago, where I only had maybe, let's say, 5 to 8 fish tanks, I'd probably use hang on the back filters in those tanks. I would have the energy for that in terms of the number of outlets, and it would keep the tanks looking nice, and I would be able to hide the filtration a little bit better. As you get more fish tanks, the sponge filters might be a better way to go. Or if you're looking for something super low maintenance and something where maybe you've got a tank where you're going to be breeding fish and you want that sponge to possibly be a source of food for them and not have to worry about fry getting sucked up in the intake, well, then a sponge filter might be a way for you to do that as well. So that's kind of our take on it. We use both. At some point in the future, we'll talk more about other types of filtration, sums, canister filters, things of that nature. But we'd love to hear your suggestions, your comments in the comments section below. If you've got a preference for one over the other, definitely share that. We want this to be a place where people can come, they hear what I have to say, but you guys also have a ton of experience with both types of filters. If there's something you really like about sponge filters or hang on the back filters, leave that in the comments section below. We'd certainly appreciate that. If you like this video, share, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.